As you may have realized from the name of this channel, I'm a green player. This was true when I first started with Magic, playing Simic Hydras and Krakens in Kitchen Table Standard from Journey into Nyx and Born of the Gods, and it's true now, having gotten heavily into Commander. What is now my longest standing list is, to many in my playgroups, my signature deck, and it is helmed by a commander from the much and probably fairly maligned mini set March of the Machines: The Aftermath, Nissa Resurgent Animist. A 3/3 for green and 2 generic, she has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. Then, if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an elf or elemental card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. She's essentially a Lotus Cobra in the command zone and has a source of specific draw for a lot of creatures you want to win or further accelerate your deck, like Avenger of Zendikar, Ashaya, Soul of the Wild, or them. She is capable of rapidly accelerating your mana production, allowing you to create pretty ridiculous board states very quickly. So let's talk about the deck I'm known for, Nissan 350Z. So obviously we're playing around the landfall mechanic here, and to do that well we need to be reliably playing lands, as well as additional lands on our turn to ramp ahead of our opponents and find cards with Nissa's trigger. In terms of cards that allow us to play additional lands on each of our turns, we have Exploration, a great turn 1 play that will let us get more lands out reliably, Wayward Swordtooth, which will quickly be able to attack or block due to us flooding the board with permanents on each of our turns, Azusa, Lost But Seeking, which by itself takes us to 3 land plays a turn, and Oracle of Moldiah, which will help us sustain playing 2 lands a turn by letting us play them from the top of our library as well. Obviously we're running a number of fetch lands in this deck, as with Nissa out, playing and cracking a fetch will generate us 2 mana and get an elf or elemental into our hand. We're running the classics Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, as well as the newcomers Shire Terrace and Escape Tunnel, alongside the 3 forest fetches from Streets of New Capenna, Broker's Hideout, Cabaretti Courtyard, and Riveteer's Overlook. As for spells that fetch us lands to ramp and get our additional triggers, we're running Crop Rotation, which will let us get any land out untapped. Depending on the situation, our ideal targets are likely Reliquary Tower, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, or Castle Garenbrig. For more low-cost fetches, we're running Harrow, Kodama's Reach, and Entish Restoration. And for late-game, potentially game-winning amounts of landfall triggering, we're running Open the Way, also from Aftermath, as well as Awaken the Woods, which, with Nissa out, essentially costs 2 mana, triggering landfall as many times as you want or can afford. For permanents that fetch us lands, we've got another dino in Topiary Stomper, Sporocyst, which will let you pay green and XX to fetch X lands, and Sword of the Animist, which will allow us to fetch lands when the equipped creature attacks. For the last of our landfall enablers, we've got 2 special effects. Ashaya, Soul of the Wild, which makes all of our non-token creatures forest lands in addition to their other types, allowing landfall to trigger on us playing creatures, and Root Path Purifier, which makes all lands under our control and in our library basic. This opens up our options for what we can fetch with lands and spells, as well as providing some protection against cards like Blood Moon or non-basic land destruction like Demolition Field. Handy. So with all of these lands entering the battlefield on our side and generating mana, we also want some triggers besides Nissa's to really leverage this and generate additional value. We're running Tireless Tracker to generate clues and give us an extra source of card draw, and Tireless Provisioner to give us treasures for more mana or food for life gain where we need it. Tireless Provisioner can be found off of Nissa's second trigger as well. Handy. We're also making 4/4 Beasts with Rampaging Balos, 3/3 Badgers with Greensleeve's Maro Sorcerer, and a million billion gajillion bugs with Scoot Swarm. To help amplify some of the counters we'll be placing with other cards, we're running Evolution Sage, and one of our potential win cons is the aforementioned Avenger of Zendikar, which will often be making a silly amount of plant tokens which we can then pump with our fetches, Awaken the Woods, or Nissa who shakes the world's ultimate. Hard to say. For more non-land based mana generation to enable us playing our deck that much faster, we're running Birds of Paradise, Elvish Mystic, and Elvish Spirit Guide, all of which give us that extra mana on turn 2 to get Nissa out and start triggering landfall on turn 3 or earlier. We've got a Soul Ring in here, obviously, for that same reason, and to help cast some of our bigger creatures we're running Castle Garenbrig. For really explosive mana generation, we've got Selvala Heart of the Wilds and Growing Rites of Itlimoc, which will let us get another creature in hand, then generate massive amounts of green mana when we flip it into Itlamok, Cradle of the Sun. For further cost reduction, we've got Emerald Medallion, and we're also running Monster Manual to put another creature in our hand and cheat out our big boys when we cast it as an artifact. When I initially started this list, I ran more mana rocks, but after a lot of play, I realized that the sheer amount of land ramp in this list makes anything outside of Sol Ring unnecessary. And I might even remove that at some point. Anything's possible. So while we've got creatures coming into hand from some of our previous includes, we need to make sure we're also reliably getting lands in hand, as well as sources of interaction. We have a number of enchantments that provide repeatable sources of card draw, namely Sylvan Library, Up the Beanstalk, Shaper's Sanctuary, and Garruk's Uprising, which also makes our creatures scarier by giving them all trample. We've also got Tribute to the World Tree, which will provide card draw off our landfall triggers on Rampaging Baloths and Greensleeves, and power up our smaller creatures with 2+1/+1 counters. Scoot Swarms entering as 3/3s can become a problem real quick. We're also running Leaf Crown Visionary to provide the option of paying to draw off of elves, as well as Tranquil Thicket, which we can cycle, and Mosswort Bridge, which lets us cheat something out with Hideaway. For really explosive sources of one-off card draw, we're also running Return of the Wild Speaker, Shamanic Revelation, and Rishkar's Expertise. Mass draw is also the primary reason we're running Garruk Primal Hunter. We've also got 2 X-cost creature tutors in Invasion of Ikoria and Finale of Devastation, which is unsurprisingly a frequent win con when you can dump as much mana into it as this deck often can. With a deck that is focused largely around board state and playing permanents, we need at least a couple ways of protecting them. At least until there's a big enough board state that removing a single creature or enchantment wouldn't solve anything. To keep Nissa on board and triggering early, we're running Swiftfoot Boots, Guardian Augmenter, which can be flashed in if needed, and Tamio's Safekeeping. When it comes to later in the game, we are going to be a prime target for removal and board wipes. So we've also got Heroic Intervention to prevent damage or destruction-based board wipes, or any kind of spot removal. Things like Farewell will still be an issue, but when is it not? Obviously, we're doing our best here to outpace our opponents and swing for lethal as fast as possible. But in more drawn-out games, this deck is particularly weak to flyers. For this reason, I'm running Sandworm Convergence, which has saved me more times than I can count. The latest and most ludicrous example being when my opponent Tom Inkshielded 13,000 odds 3/3 Scoot Swarms and made 39,000 tokens, which were then locked out of attacking me due to this enchantment. Neat. To deal with the potential problem artifacts and enchantments on others' boards, we're running Fade into Antiquity, Crozen Grip, and Naturalize, as well as Boseiju Who Endures, Freyalise Llanowar's Fury, and Pest Infestation. To deal with creatures, we're running Animist Might and Azuri's Predation, and for more general targets, we've got Beast Within. There often isn't a need for massive amounts of removal in this deck, as it mainly looks to race to a winning board state and start removing players. These couple key pieces are more often than not enough to deal with issues that emerge and start swinging. One problem that can crop up in mono green is the lack of access to cards that end up in your graveyard. To allow us to access lands that end up in the yard, we're running Life from the Loam, as well as Conduit of Worlds, which has the useful ability, if we're really in a bind, of letting us cast a non-land permanent from our grave as our only spell for that turn. Often this can be the difference between having enough creatures to swing out or not, so it's definitely welcome. To further combat the issue that our win con might be in our yard, we've also got Eternal Witness in this list. To help our creatures out a little bit more than just making them swing into our opponents, we're running a couple sources of bonuses. A common issue with Scoot Swarm is that you can completely flood the board with Scoots, then have to sit there for a turn, waiting for Summoning Sickness to wear off and praying no one's holding a board wipe. That's where Concordant Crossroads comes in. Don't take a turn off, get swinging. Obviously, I'm running my namesake Omnath in this deck. With the amount of floating mana that Nissa's triggers generate, having Omnath out is really helpful, as you can accumulate all of it on them. Firstly, making them really big, but secondly, ensuring you've always got mana open on others' turns for protection and removal spells. These next 3 cards are a little bit of a bundle, as they all go hand in hand, particularly for situations where games get dragged out and you need to eke out a win. Witch's Clinic will let you give Nissa lifelink to regain some health in a game's latter stages, Blackblade Reforged will give her +1/+1 for each land you control, often quite a lot, and Rogue's Passage will let you make her unblockable to go for the win on commander damage. No matter how powerful players get, they can always fall to a hippie with a knife. This last card is definitely a break glass in case of emergency deal. It's Zuran Orb, which lets you sack lands for 2 life. It is great in situations where you need to quickly gain life to avoid being hit for lethal, or to evade some more specific scenarios. The main one that comes to mind for me is that if you have a Shire out and someone tries to cast a form of mass land destruction, all your non-token creatures would be destroyed in addition to your actual lands. Zuran Orb will let you prevent this at instant speed by sacrificing a Shire, preventing your entire board from being wiped. I'm running 21 basic forests in this land for a total land count of 36, but as you can probably imagine, as long as I'm drawing cards and playing lands, this deck is really short for mana. You might have also noticed a visual theme with this deck, which is as many retro frames as possible. I've managed to fully kit out the basics and a few more cards in the 99, but I know there's retro printings of more than a couple of cards in this list that I don't have, so if you do, I want them. I'll always have a soft spot for this deck, as it's the first deck I built entirely from scratch. It has grown and evolved with me in my Commander journey, and I have no doubts that it will continue to do so. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this list, and let me know about the decks that you've become known for in your playgroups. I'd love to hear about them. Thanks as always for watching, and if you give me a +1/+1 and like and subscribe, I'll move it on to someone else at the beginning of my upkeep. See you next time.